Welcome back to After Hours with me, Rick Kogan. It is my great pleasure to have on, from wherever she is, by telephone, Patty Farmer, the author most recently of Playboy Laughs, the comedy, Comedians and Cartoons of Playboy. Your previous books, Patty, and hi, and thank you for coming on the show, and you are an amazing writer, and you're an astonishing, I must tell you, interviewer and researcher. How's that?
Thank you.
So you're
you got it all in there.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much.
Put that on your next jacket quote thing. You've written previously The Persian Room Presents, starring The Plaza, and Playboy Swings. How did you... This book is, I think, a terribly important book because it recognized, generations of Americans somehow underrate Playboy, either as for its cultural importance. I've written about Playboy for a long time and think that Playboy may indeed be among the most important publications and enterprises of the 20th century. I think you would have to agree with that, would you not?
Oh, completely agree with you, Rick. And you've written about it, but, not that many other people have really talked about it or put enough emphasis on what Hugh Hefner and Playboy did for entertainment.
To that point, Patty Farmer, what first grabbed you? Your first book about Playboy is Playboy Swings, talking about its astonishing influence in the world of popular and contemporary music, and especially jazz. How did you grab onto this?
I didn't go looking for a story there, but I'm an entertainment historian, and I write about entertainment and older entertainers just by virtue of them being there.
Mm-hmm.
And people, celebrities that you hear about, iconic singers like Jack Jones and comedians like Shecky Green and Joan Rivers, I would be interviewing them for other things, and they would tell me about a story starting out at Playboy. So it really got me looking into the influence Playboy had on the culture. And it did. From 1960 to 1980, it really made a bridge for the comedians and for the musicians, from the nightclub era to, for comedians to the comedy clubs and the improv. But it provided a stage, and it provided work with its collection of 42 clubs around the world.
Oh, it was the greatest circuit. It was the greatest circuit imaginable, to my mind. And one of the things, too, Patty Farmer, that just since we're talking now this week, the death of Dick Gregory, he certainly is a big part of your book, but this goes to Hugh Hefner's ability to... There were no black comics in white clubs until there was Dick Gregory at the Playboy Club, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
1960, the country was still operating under segregation. Civil Rights Act didn't come into effect until 1964. But Hugh Hefner said, screw that. Dick Gregory's funnier than heck, and put him on the stage.
Yeah, which is an unbelievably bold move. And you do a lovely job in your book, Patty, if I can call you Patty, of setting the time and the place, as you write at the very beginning of the book, to contextualize Playboy's contribution to the evolution of comedy. Let's travel back to the state of things prior to its emergence. This will be, I've studied and read a lot about comedy, but this will be, for most readers, a real revelation to realize how basically dull, is that a good word, and conventional a lot of what passed for American comedy was at the time, before Playboy.
Definitely, and Hefner was brave and bold in a couple different ways. He put Lenny Bruce on his TV show in 1959, and gave George Carlin a stage, and Richard Pryor and Flip Wilson, and all these great comics. Even Joan Rivers, talking to Joan Rivers, she started out in Playboy as part of a trio, so it let her among a score of other comedians, work in front of an audience and learn their timing. And, if you read the book, I'm not going to tell it all. I want people to buy the book.
No, I want people to buy. I want people to buy the book too. One of the revelations in your book, and I keep saying, "Ooh, I know so much about American comedy. I know plenty." One of the revelations is your book is about the incredible influence and importance of Professor Irwin Corey. Did that surprise you? I thought of him as, well, he was this goofy guy, period. But he was a mentor to comics. He was a big influence with comics. Did you know that, or did that come as a revelation to you, too?
I didn't. That was part of the research, and that's how I write. I always start out putting together a research team, and we pour over, all the facts. But then I go to the performers themselves.
Oh,
and
yeah.
How lucky was I? Irwin Corey has been around since 1960, and we only lost him at 102. What was it, last year or the beginning of this year?
Well, in the book, you have an amazing picture of Irwin Corey. One of the most astonishing pictures in the book, and I just have a galley proof now, is this picture of Irwin Corey and Dick Gregory. And to learn that Irwin Corey I just thought his act was kind of goofy the few times I've seen it. But you, through interviews, have proven you have given him his due, Patty Farmer. You really have.
Well, thank you for that. But, he was the story. And exactly like you, I thought he was the goofy, Professor Irwin Corey, and he wore sloppy clothes and just, made up these nonsensical things. But he gave that first job at the Playboy Club. He didn't play the club one night, and Dick Gregory filled in.
Yeah.
And they've been lifelong friends, and we just lost both of them.
Right.
Unfortunately, which is why I do what I do, because we lose
they are.
These great
you're right.
people.
They are vanishing. You also, Patty, I get the sense just from I'm talking to Patty Farmer, the author most recently of Playboy Laughs, the comedy, comedians, and cartoons of Playboy. I sense the palpable passion you feel for sitting down with these people and getting the stories from them firsthand.
Definitely. I do have a passion for it because I want to get that history down.
Yeah.
And I think my readers, it's more interesting for them to hear Irwin Corey tell the story rather than to hear me say Irwin Corey told me this or that. And it's funny, we're in such a PC world now.
Oh.
And there's a story Irwin tells. I put down one of his classic jokes, and I won't bore you, or not bore you. It's a very funny joke. But it's a Jewish joke. And my editor, who looks like she's 12 years old.
Don't they all? Don't they all? Yeah.
But she came back and she said, "You cannot tell this joke. You'll offend all the Jews in the world." And I said, Irwin Corey was a devout Jew. I said, this is a funny joke. He told it for decades, half a century. It stays in the book.
Good for you.
We're being affected by all this PC.
Oh, I know.
And we're missing a lot.
Well, that's one of the joys of the book for me, was to go back to an era when everything was not so tightly wound. You have a lovely section on my very good friend Tom Dreesen in here too, and you really. And that told me that the book was, it told me a lot about you. I mean, you got Tommy in this book and got him the way he is, and that's to your credit. Patty, if you can hold on a little longer, just through a short commercial break, I want to talk also about the sort of underrated humor that was Playboy. Not just the cartoons, but one of my favorite writers of all time, Shel Silverstein, who is a local Chicagoan, played a big part in Playboy. Can you do that, Patty? Can you hang on?
Absolutely. Wouldn't go anywhere.
Talking to Patty Farmer, because I always thought, well, I'll tell you about my feelings about Mr. Hefner, who I've interviewed a number of times, and his sense of humor. I'm talking to Patty Farmer, the author most recently of Playboy Laughs, the comedy, comedians, and cartoons of Playboy. We'll be back in a couple minutes. Welcome back. After Hours, me, Rick Kogan. The book you need to buy is Playboy Laughs, the comedy, comedians, and cartoons of Playboy. It is revelatory, and it is also important, and it also highlights the tremendous cultural impact that Playboy and a man named Hugh Hefner, a local man, had on the American culture. One of the things that you remind people about, Patty, in talking about the incredible artwork and cartoons that were featured in Playboy is that Hugh Hefner himself, from the time he was a young man, that's what he wanted to do, isn't it? He wanted to be a cartoonist.
Definitely, and what a different world it would have been if he had been successful.
Oh boy, yeah. What a different childhood I would have had too, yeah. but that's why he was, he hired, as you know, a man named Art Paul to be his first art director, and Art's still alive here and still lives not far from here, and he was something of a genius too. But that's why the art that was featured in Playboy, the Vargas cartoons, some of the other great cartoonists, they were funny, but they were, in their fashion, as talented as any cartoonist working in publishing, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And that was part of Hef's genius,
Yep.
hiring the very best, hiring Art, who in turn, hired the Shel Silversteins and the Leroy Neiman's and the Jack Coles to do cartoons and illustrations for the magazine. The cream of the crop, of the business, definitely.
You have gotten to know Hefner because he has and his son Cooper too. They have been very helpful to you. I mean, that has not always been the case with Playboy. There was a very tightly wound sometimes company, but you've gotten to know him, and I know he's getting older now, but there's a great deal to admire there, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. He's 91, and just that we still have that library alive is fascinating to me. And, again, like you just mentioned, Cooper's going to be taking over at 25, I think he is, or right around there. And it's almost like stepping back in time because he looks exactly like Hef did back in the day. But,
he doesn't. The other thing about her, I've met him a couple times. He's a very bright guy, but he also is incredibly, I think, respectful of the legacy. He understands the very things that we're talking about, the importance of Playboy. And you sometimes in certain quarters will go, oh, yeah, Playboy, ha, ha, ha. But what you're doing in your book, Playboy Laughs, and what Cooper is doing too, I think, is reminding people of that it would be, without Playboy, this would be I'm not going to say vastly different world, but it would be a different world, don't you think?
I definitely think so. Like you mentioned Hugh Hefner, and you kind of get a wink and a nod, and people think they know everything. But Hefner, we talked about breaking the color barrier. He was also really a champion for women, and people find that amazing. Yeah. But in the magazine, he wrote about women's issues and the right for choice and advocated the availability of the pill, all these things that were not popular when he did them. So
I know, and he was also one of the most energetic First Amendment defenders in the history of this country. And I don't mean that to sound hyperbolic, but I really do believe this. He fought for the First Amendment, which is our right to speak and say what we want. more energetically and smarter than most people did. You, as a woman, Patty Farmer, you do a lovely job of, boy, talking about what life was like in an all-male dominated world. You do a lovely job of highlighting a couple of the first female comics to really burst out on the scene. Phyllis Diller and Joan Rivers, who was a product of the Second City here. You had to have gained an unbelievable admiration for these women because they are duking it out in what really was a male-dominated scene, the comedy scene in this country, don't you think?
Definitely trailblazers. You know, Phyllis Diller, not only was she one of our first female comedians, but she was a middle-aged comedian.
Mm-hmm.
I think when she hit the circuits and the TV shows, she was in her 40s. You know, the kids were grown, and she took a chance, and that was so brave of her. And she influenced people like Joan Rivers and Lily Tomlin and Kay Ballard and Toady Fields. And, you know, even today, I don't really think it's a balance in the comedy world with men and women.
It's a hard life, and it's a hard life. You know, the Playboy circuit was one thing, and you were sort of taken care of much better than you are in the what passes for the kind of comedy club circuit and sleeping upstairs at various dumps along the way. You also highlight, God, this is such a good book, Patty Farmer, I got to tell you. As I've thumbed through it again, I read it about last week. Some of the writing, too, that was in Playboy was some of the best, because Hefner and Playboy paid the top fees for writers of serious fiction and humor pieces that was available to writers in the country. I mean, that's why you had people like, you know, John Updike in the magazine and Philip Roth and all these other, some people would not always think of as funny, but that's another part of the Hefner genius, yes?
Definitely, and that really is where people said, you know, I read it for the articles and the stories. You had Ian Fleming. He wrote 7 short stories for Playboy before they were picked up by Hollywood and became On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Diamonds Are Forever. And just to show you how much Ian admired Hef, quickly, I'll tell you that in Diamonds Are Forever, you might remember this, but at one scene, James Bond flips out his wallet, and next to his license to kill is his Playboy Club card.
That's right. How funny. God, that's right. You really have a memory. I know that, Patty Farmer, I certainly already ordered your first book, Playboy Swings, after reading this one, but this is part of a trilogy that you're doing on Playboy Enterprises, is it not?
Right. The next one is Playboy Thinks, and it goes more into depth about what we were just talking about the writing and the editorials and the interviews. I don't even think we have time to talk about the interviews.
No.
But, you know, those great interviews, Alex Haley interviewing the Grand Marshal or
of
the
Ku
Grand
Klux
Wizard
Klan.
of the...
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So many things like that to round out the trilogy. You know, people know about the bunnies and the mansion and the girls next door, but they really haven't paid attention to the entertainment.
One of the interesting things, and you write about one of my dearest friends I've ever known, Arnie Morton, and who helped invent the Playboy clubs, and you dedicate the book. Hefner did too, but you also dedicate the book to Victor Lowndes, who died earlier this year too. They just don't make guys like this anymore, do they, Patty?
No. Can you imagine 3 young guys all in their 20s sitting around, Hef, Vic, and Arnie, thinking what fun it would be to have their own club, and they each threw money into it. And
well, and then Arnie, and then Arnie went on to, to found the Morton Steakhouse empire, and his daughter Amy runs a great couple of restaurants in Evanston. Do you ever get to Chicago, Patty?
I do. get there on occasion, maybe twice a year or so.
Let me know the next time you can come in the studio and we'll spend 2 hours talking about your work and your book. This book was, I thought it might be skimming over, but it's an in-depth, fascinating, incredibly deeply researched look at the importance of Playboy when it comes to modern comedy in America. And anybody who's in the comedy business would know this, but you readers should know it too. The book is called Playboy Laughs, the Comedy, Comedians, and Cartoons of Playboy. Recently published. The author is Patty Farmer. You should get it as soon as you possibly can. Patty, it's a pleasure to meet you on the phone. I hope to meet you one day in person.
I would love that, Rick.
Thank you. It's a terrific
a treat
book.
Talking to you.
Yeah, you too.
You.
No, you too. You too. I have a long history with that Playboy outfit. So thank you, and thank you all for listening, and thank you, Aubrey Mumpower, for engineering, and thank you, Lise Graham, for doing everything else that I could possibly want in a producer and a friend.